Welcome to Scrolling to Death. I'm Nikki, and today I'm joined by Julie Scelfo, who is a former New York Times staff writer, a media ecologist, and a mom of three, and most recently the founder of Mothers Against Media Addiction. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Nikki. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. I've been super excited to talk to you. You're doing huge things in support of kids everywhere. So let's talk about Mothers Against Media Addiction, which is MAMA for short. So can you tell listeners what is MAMA and kind of why you started this movement?
MAMA is a grassroots movement of parents fighting back against media addiction and creating a world where real life experiences and interactions remain at the heart of a healthy childhood. As
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned, I'm a longtime journalist and I began reporting on youth mental health maybe 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, did a lot of stories about suicide. A couple of years ago, we started seeing an increase in suicide rates among adolescents. And as I reported on this, I began to see that social media was playing a not insignificant role in shaping how young people experience their childhoods, their adolescence, their identities.
Mm-hmm.
And then flash forward a few years later, and suicide rates began increasing in tweens, which are children as young as 10.
Yep.
And reporting that story really kind of shook me to my core as
Mm-hmm.
a parent. And I was like, what is going on? We can't keep letting this happen. And I realized we needed to do something.
Yeah. My story is so similar to yours. And it was the seeing the suicide rates and hearing the stories of the families who'd lost a child, normal kids, and they just went down, made a bad choice or were dealing with cyberbullying or, bought one pill off of Snapchat and it happened to be laced with fentanyl. And I just thought if every parent knew these stories and these stats, they would surely make safer decisions around social media and screens and knowing that link.
Years ago, when I was reporting a different story, I
Mm-hmm.
remember learning how, not all the products on the shelves are regulated. For example, at the time, I don't know the status now, but if
Mm-hmm.
you tried to buy a diet supplement or like a powder
Mm-hmm.
that goes in a shake, it isn't exactly regulated.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a food, it's not a drug, and
Mm-hmm.
somehow it falls in between. And when I go to the store, when most of us go to the store and we see something on the shelves, we kind of
Mm-hmm.
take for granted that it's safe. We live in a country where we have the government taking care of the food supply, monitoring the safety of our meat, monitoring the safety of automobiles on the street. And so I
Mm-hmm.
don't think it occurs to most parents that these
Yeah.
products could possibly be that unsafe for their children. It's like, who would sell something that's dangerous for kids?
Mm-hmm.
And then when I learned how there are basically no regulations on social media companies right now, that
Mm-hmm.
they have complete immunity to promote whatever kind of content they want. And what they
Mm-hmm.
promote is whatever's stickiest,
Yep.
which unfortunately is
Stickiest.
often what's violent, what's, shocking,
Yep.
what's horrific.
Mm-hmm.
And, kids are getting addicted just like we adults are addicted. So
Yeah.
that was something I agree with you. I think that for me personally, I needed to learn a lot because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize how little regulation there was, and I didn't realize how harmful they were.
Yeah. And most parents don't. And you're right. Why would they sell? Why would they provide products that they say are for 13-year-olds that are so harmful and addictive? It keeps me up at night sometimes to think about how we got here and how little most parents know about the harms. I would love to talk about your kids and kind of your approach with your family too before we dive into some of the social media news and things like that. So, how old are your kids right now?
So I have three teenagers. They're
Okay.
13, 16, and 18.
Wow.
And when my oldest son was born, there were no iPhones, and Mark Zuckerberg worked at a small company called the Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time my middle son was in pre-K and I
Mm-hmm.
brought him to the elementary school, every single parent in my community was on Facebook, and they
Mm-hmm.
were inadvertently training their children to share everything online because they
Mm-hmm.
were that was when everybody, myself included, we started
Yep.
photographing our children all the time and
Yep.
sharing the photos. And by the time my third son now is in middle school, he's an eighth grader.
Mm-hmm.
He has a smartphone. He's not allowed to have TikTok, but I can't keep him from seeing TikToks because his friends send him TikToks.
Mm-hmm.
Snap has gone to these short reels. YouTube keeps going to shorter and shorter reels.
Mm-hmm.
So the type of media that really fractures their ability to develop an attention span, the type of media that kind of trains them not to be patient. It says
Mhm.
if you're even bored for the slightest second, you could swipe right and there's always something else.
Mhm.
I can't stop that from infiltrating his life. So these are things that affect us all,
Mhm.
as individuals, in our own families, and as a society.
Yeah. And I think I have this dream of just protecting them from all of this and keeping them off of all social media. My kids are 8 and under, so I have time. But reality is going to hit and I'm going to have to let them access some things or they're going to see it through their friends just like you said. And you mentioned TikTok. Is TikTok like a no-go for your kids? Like you just try to avoid
I
it?
try to make it a no-go, but like I said, I cannot stop it because even
Yeah.
if they're just texting, their friends send them TikToks.
Mhm.
And a lot of parents are not aware of what their children are seeing,
Mhm.
and their children are seeing and have access to content that's just not appropriate for children. I actually don't want to protect my kids from everything. I,
Yeah.
I feel like, I recognize that part of growing up
Mhm.
is seeing difficult things, coming to terms with the realities of life. But at the
Mhm.
same time, I think we as a society have evolved to the point that we recognize children are not adults. They should not have to deal with all the things that adults do. And it's not appropriate for children to sort of learn about fetish sex. It's not
No.
appropriate for children to see horrific images of dead bodies. And
Mhm.
yet there is absolutely nothing on the internet from stopping them from having access to that kind of information. So,
Mhm.
I mean, when I started this, I kept thinking, oh, are people going to think I'm like Tipper Gore? Remember when Tipper Gore was trying to ban, uh, well, she wasn't trying to ban music with bad lyrics, but she was trying to
Uh-huh.
get labels on them. And
Mhm.
I'm like, if my kids want to hear Prince, I will buy them the CDs and I will play it for them. And I
Yeah.
accept that at some point in their high school years, someone's going to show them pornography and they're going to have that experience. I'm just trying to stop them from being subjected to, all the worst lyrics before they're even 10 years old. I'm trying
Mhm.
to prevent us from mainlining pornography and
Right.
inappropriate images to
Right.
prepubescent children. Not
Yeah.
cool.
No. And there's a difference between, restricting them from everything as long as possible, but then like starting to introduce things, but having those open conversations about it. And you mentioned pornography. I think average age, and this is difficult to measure because it's self reported, but average age right now is about 10 years old on seeing pornography because they're seeing it, whether it's on their own device or on their friends' devices on the school bus or wherever it may be. Yeah, they're going to see it. So we have to have these conversations with them so that they know we are the safe space to come to when they do see it, if they do have questions. But also, I'm kind of pissed off at these social media companies for addicting our kids. And can you
I'm
talk?
angry too, and all
Yeah, I
parents should
know.
be angry. I mean, when you find
Yeah,
out how this works and what they're doing,
right.
they're absolutely exploiting human emotion for profit, and they're
Yeah.
addicting us. And at least we're adults, but it's
Yes.
just uncool to do that to kids. And we don't let our kids gamble. Nobody thinks it's okay for our kids to go to Vegas and pull up to the slot machine and just sit there for 12 hours.
Right.
But that's what happened. We're seeing our
Hmm.
kids on personal devices on screens for 10 plus hours a day in some cases. That's like a full-time job all
I
week. It's
know.
replacing, as Jonathan Haidt has written about so beautifully, it's
Yeah.
it's all the time on screens is displacing critical interpersonal interaction that they
Hmm.
need.
Hmm. Yeah. And these companies, I mean, they did a good job studying our kids' brains and creating a product to give them intermittent reinforcement and and addiction. I mean, I think one quote was like, teenage brains turned out to be pretty easy to manipulate, was one of the discovery documents from Meta. How are you guys at Mama reaching as many parents as possible? Because, I share a lot of these stories on my platform and a lot of stories of the harms and the research and all of that. And I'm trying to reach as many parents as possible. And a lot of parents are open to it and saying, wow, I didn't know this. I'm going to show my kids these videos, or I'm going to make some different decisions in my home. But so many parents are not open to the conversation and are thinking things like, that's not going to happen to my kid. I've taught them better, or whatever the excuse may be. So how do we reach the masses of parents that we need to in order to make a real difference when it comes
That's
to
why
this?
we started Mama, because
Yeah.
we realized, there are a lot of people in the tech reform space who've been
Hmm.
waving their hands and trying to get attention.
Yeah.
And, my first love is being a journalist and writing long form articles, but people aren't
Hmm.
even reading the way they used to. So
Hmm.
I can
Yeah.
keep writing 3,000 word articles about this stuff, but I don't think people are reading them.
Hmm. Hmm.
So Mama is forming local chapters. We're enabling parents to create a local chapter where people will meet in person on a
Hmm.
semi-regular basis, where they can get information, they can talk, they can share their concerns and hear one another, and then
Hmm.
also get action items that we can do together to try to make the change that we need to see. One of
Hmm.
the things that Mama's working for is a way for the day policies for smartphones in schools.
Hmm.
There was yet another study this week that shows simply by removing the smartphone from the school environment, grades
Hmm.
go up, happiness goes up,
Hmm.
mental health problems go down. It's absolutely crazy that we let children take smartphones to school. And
Hmm.
as I say to audiences sometimes, it's like when you're packing your child's backpack in the morning, how many of us go over to it and we add in, a slot machine, a stack of pornographic magazines, some
Right.
DVDs, some catalogs, some games, and we're like, okay, go learn something. Like, no.
Yeah.
Teachers across the country report that students who have their phones in class can be seen browsing Netflix,
Hmm.
shopping, doing
Hmm.
all of these things that they're not supposed to be doing. And it's a
Yeah.
distraction. And it's coming at a cost to our society.
Hmm.
Reading and math scores are at their lowest level right now than they've been
Hmm.
since we started measuring in 1971.
Yeah.
It's not good.
Yeah, and I had just got done interviewing dozens of teachers across the country, and the funniest thing that every time I talked to a teacher, they came up with a different way to say, I have to be an entertainer, not an educator. I could be up there juggling chainsaws on fire. If you look at my Instagram story right now, it's literally a lineup of all these teachers saying that very similar thing. It can be frustrating because even I sat in an online safety meeting at my school 3 days ago, and I asked the principal, like, what's our smartphone policy? And it's just Lucy, they have to be away, but then every teacher has to implement it, and then the teacher is the bad guy, which is a difficult thing to be, have this relationship with a student. So in your eyes and in your experience, what are you seeing as the ideal way to keep phones actually away during the school day?
Well, I think part of what needs to happen here is we have to back up and look at the bigger picture of
Mm-hmm.
what's happening in our children's lives and in our society. We're called Mothers Against Media Addiction. We're not mothers against smartphone addiction or mothers against social media.
Mm-hmm.
We as a society are addicted to media, and
Mm-hmm.
we have screens everywhere now. We put them in every room of our homes, we put them in our bedrooms, we put them in restaurants, in elevators, in
Mm-hmm.
cars. And this idea that the human brain needs to be entertained all the time is
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And because we are constantly stimulated, we're also seeing an increase in children who are overstimulated, who have attention issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we all need to step back and say, okay, maybe we can slow things down. Tech
Mm-hmm.
isn't bad, tech can be helpful, tech can be fun, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe a screen is not appropriate for every single situation. So that's the first step, is sort of
Mm-hmm.
stepping back. And the
Yeah.
next step, I think, is for parents to really reconsider giving their children smart devices. I live in New York City. My children travel on the subway alone. I would like to be in touch with them, but I
Mm-hmm.
recognize I don't have to be in touch with them.
Mm-hmm.
In case of an emergency, there are police officers everywhere, there's MTA workers, there are
Mm-hmm.
lots of adults and strangers. They could always ask for help. The
Mm-hmm.
idea that we need to be in constant contact with our children is misguided, and it's also harmful because
Mm-hmm.
it creates a sense of fear in them that they don't need to have.
Yeah.
So if you absolutely need to have your child, I mean, I completely regret not starting with flip phones for my children. I think
Mm-hmm.
starting with flip phones is a great way that if you feel that you must be connected to your child or you want them
Hmm.
to be able to reach you. Giving them a flip phone enables them to call you, enables them to text, but it doesn't give them access to the whole internet and the whole
Hmm.
world, which means strangers can't contact them. They can't be sextorted. They can't, be
Yeah.
harassed. They can't see inappropriate content. So
Yep.
I think backing up and making those big picture changes is really a good first step.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think we can all have a better understanding now that full blown smartphones like an iPhone and an Android were created for adults. And now we're trying to backtrack and make them safe for children, but it's just difficult to do that. So, luckily, now parents have other options like old flip phones or dumb phones or bark phones and things like that. So, we have lots of options. And I agree that should be the number one choice. An iPhone shouldn't even be an option, in my opinion, for that first phone.
Again, I don't ever want to make parents feel badly or shame them because
No,
there
no,
is
no.
no parenting mistake I haven't made at least 3 times over.
Uh huh.
Okay, so let's be clear about that.
Yeah.
But when I gave my kids a smartphone and allowed them, my oldest, for example, to join Instagram so he could stay in touch with his cousins who lived in other states,
Hmm.
I didn't really think it through and I didn't realize what it would mean when his cousin, who was just 2 years older, got to high school before he did, went through
Mm,
puberty before he did. Her
mhm.
friends started posting bikini pictures, drinking photo, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And, social media just opens up the whole world to them. And
Mhm.
it's too much for kids sometimes. And so really setting healthier boundaries, I think is a great idea.
Yeah, and letting kids be kids for as long as possible because you hear all the time the quote like, when you give a kid a smartphone, you take away their childhood, things like that. And I believe in that. And I wanted to jump back to TikTok really quick. So, TikTok has been in the news this week, and you mentioned it's one of those platforms that you would prefer your children not spend time on. So, the big news this week was President Biden signed a new law which requires the Chinese company that owns TikTok to either sell the app to an American company or we will ban it from our app stores. So I'd love your thoughts on this new legislation. How do you feel about it?
I'm really glad that our legislators have begun to pay such close attention
Yeah.
to what's happening and the scourge of media addiction and the harms of social media. And we're
Hmm.
certainly open to a number of different solutions.
Hmm.
At the same time, for any policy to be effective, it has to withstand First Amendment scrutiny.
Yeah.
And so that's why we've been very supportive of the age appropriate design code,
Hmm.
which instead of just addressing a single platform, it implements design reforms and additional protections for young people
Hmm.
right from the start. It addresses the underlying harms, not just banning a platform outright. Because if you
Okay.
ban TikTok on Wednesday, on Thursday somebody's going to introduce Tok Tok. you know, it's just
Right.
these these developers can come out with products,
Yeah.
very quickly, and we've seen just you know how fast and easy it is for something to become popular, for something to fall out of favor. So what we need to
Hmm.
do is have proper safeguards in the system so
Hmm.
that, you know, the age appropriate design code, for example, which goes by the kids code, it's
Hmm.
based on existing law in the UK
Okay.
that creates a duty of care to social media companies
Hmm.
to design their platforms in a way that's safest for kids. So, for example, all the settings are on maximum privacy, not
Hmm.
minimum privacy.
Okay.
Parents have a choice. If you're, Kim Kardashian and you want your children to be able to be contacted by anyone, you can go in and you can make it public. But for
Hmm.
most of us, regular folks, when we set up an account for our kids, it gives them the maximum privacy,
Hmm.
the maximum safety. So
Okay.
we think solutions like that are the way to go.
And can they adjust their own privacy settings at that point, or the parent has to control that?
So this is where it gets so complicated, right?
Yeah.
Because certainly all of the products on the market now say there's parental controls.
Hmm.
But I can tell you that, a few years ago, one of my children, who I will not name because he would be embarrassed, but
Hmm.
he was so addicted to social media that he overrode the parent limits for 6 hours using the 1 more minute function.
Oh,
And I mean, can you imagine how many
every
times he had to
minute?
every minute for 6 hours. And I thought
6
this was
times
crazy. And as a
60.
journalist, I'm like, okay, how do I turn off 1 more minute? So I researched it, and you can
Uh-huh.
do this too. If you look online, you will find hundreds, if not thousands, of comments from parents whose children have done the same thing, begging
Wow.
Apple to turn off this function. Why won't Apple turn off this function?
Mm-hmm.
The parent controls don't really work. So,
Yeah.
we need changes at the product level, we need
Mm-hmm.
changes at the app level, and
Yeah.
we need for the design of these platforms to be required to operate with kids in mind.
Mm-hmm. Does the age appropriate design code does it remove the algorithms for children? Anything there?
I have been looking at so many different pieces of
Okay.
legislation in the
Yeah.
last week. I'm forgetting for a
Okay.
second,
Yeah,
but
this
I
is just
think,
one of those that I'm not as familiar with. I hear a lot about COSA and things like that.
well, so COSA is a federal law, the Kids Online Safety Act, which we're
Yes.
very supportive. It has 67 tripartisan co-sponsors. It's Republicans, Democrats, and an independent.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
I don't know why COSA hasn't passed yet, but I'd really
Right.
like to see it passed
Yeah.
quickly. We're supportive of COPPA 2.0.
Mm-hmm.
COPPA is the Child Online Privacy Protection Act.
Mm-hmm.
And that years ago, when it passed,
Mm-hmm.
lobbyists convinced the legislators to make it only apply to children 13 and under, when originally
Mm-hmm.
they wanted it to be 16 and under. So
Mm-hmm.
updating it would just bring the date a little higher, which we absolutely should do.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids code, which is the age appropriate design code, that not only affects privacy settings, it creates a duty of care. And I
Mm-hmm.
believe it does force social media products that are used by a large number of people
Mm-hmm.
to not have endless scroll, which is a feature
Mm-hmm.
that
Is
is
bad.
part of what keeps you addicted. But again, apologies if that's not exactly right. There's a
No, that's
website
okay.
people can go to, and I'm going to look it up while we talk, but it has
Okay.
all the details there.
Yeah. What do you think about the age limit being 13 for social media? And right now we have some states adjusting that and trying to implement actual age verification. What do you feel like is the best solution for keeping or for what age kids should access social media and how to verify their actual ages?
Well, when it comes to ages, I think that our Surgeon General is a really good example for us. And
Mm-hmm.
he has said that he won't even consider giving his children a smartphone till they're in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I know that Jonathan Haidt has made a very good evidence-based argument for
Mm-hmm.
why no no child under 16 should have a smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
Let them get through puberty, let them get through that very challenging
Mm-hmm.
developmental time in
Yep.
their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I have heard from people in the tech world that some folks who work inside social media companies think it should be outlawed for anyone under 16, and some think it should be anyone under 18.
Mm-hmm.
So when I hear that, it's a very challenging thing for us as parents because we want good relationships with our kids. We
Mm-hmm.
certainly want them to be able to communicate with their friends and stay in touch with friends.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that kind of comes back to Mama's mission statement. And that's why we're working on creating a world where real life experiences and interactions remain at the heart of a healthy childhood. If your
Mm-hmm.
kids are chatting a little bit on text so that they can go meet in the park, that's one thing. But
Yeah.
if they're living their entire lives online, that's
Mm-hmm.
another thing.
Yeah, I agree. And I love that you guys help to bring moms together to have these moms and dads to have these conversations because that can be the barrier. So if your friend or if your kids, all their friends are on social media and chatting there, they're going to feel left out. It's going to be put pressure on you to let them have access to smartphones and social media. But if you've already communicated with the group of parents and you've all decided to withhold social media till a certain age or give them, dumb phones or bark phones, then that pressure is less. So, how tell me with Mama, how do you help to connect parents together to have these discussions?
So our website's joinmama.org, and
Mm-hmm.
when you sign up there, it goes to our organizing director, and we comb through all of the messages that we receive to identify people who are interested in starting Mama chapters,
Mm-hmm.
hosting kickoff parties in their states, and those who just want to be connected to our messages and learn about Mama activities.
Mm-hmm.
We provide training for Mama chapter leaders. These are moms or dads, or we're not only for parents, we're actually for allies and anyone who cares
Mm,
about kids,
right.
because you know everyone's an aunt, an uncle,
Yeah.
a teacher. You don't have to be a parent. Not
Hmm.
everybody's a parent, and they still care about the well-being of kids.
Yeah.
So we then connect people in a local community so they can start meeting, and we are hard at work getting ready to roll out some more infrastructure that's going to allow us to more quickly connect everybody. But
Okay.
I'm not ready to announce that yet. So
Okay. No problem.
right now we offer a monthly expert insight series, which is
Okay.
online. So it's 1 hour a month that you can join and hear from an expert in the field.
Hmm.
Our kickoff speaker was Jonathan Haidt. He
Oh, amazing.
shared information about his book right before it was published.
Hmm.
The next one was Lisa Dalmore, and we just announced our speakers for May. But we will be doing this every month, and we are going to bring parents conversations with lawmakers, with lawyers, with parents, psychologists, you name it, who can shed light on a different facet of what it means
Hmm.
to think about media more carefully and how
Hmm.
to sort of navigate media addiction in today's world. So that's
Hmm.
the easiest way to get involved with Mama. And then the next easiest way is to just go to joinmama.org,
Hmm.
sign up for our newsletters. We won't bombard you with newsletters. We think that people get too many messages, too much email,
Yeah.
but we will send you an occasional newsletter with updates that are useful and invite you to a meeting in your community.
Hmm. Amazing. I think this is the key element here is connecting caregivers, parents, and concerned people together to have these conversations and educate each other and share stories and share what's worked and hasn't worked to make a bigger impact on the world and how we're introducing screens and social media to our kids. I want to note you mentioned Jonathan Haidt a couple times. So his book is called The Anxious Generation. I highly recommend everyone read that book. Any
And
other
if you don't want to read a
yeah.
whole book, go read his articles. John gave an excerpt of the book to the
Mm-hmm.
Atlantic magazine that you
Mm.
can go read.
Yeah.
And I've written many articles on very specific topics about, for example, one feeling that parents have, which I understand is sort of worrying about school shootings. We live in a time where that happens, and parents
Mm-hmm.
think, oh, my kid has to have a phone in case of a school shooting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I reported that out and I spoke to a lot of security experts, and it turns out a phone might make them more unsafe during a shooting
Yeah.
because what they need in an emergency is for your child to pay careful attention to the teacher,
Mm-hmm.
to the law enforcement officers, the security professionals who've been trained what to do. And sometimes if your child's on a phone and distracted, they're not going
Mm-hmm.
to be paying full attention.
Mm-hmm.
So, parents have this idea that the smartphone is somehow going to keep them safe, and it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
actually work like that.
Thank you for digging into that because I literally had someone ask me again today or mention my kid's going to have a phone on them, on Instagram, a comment. My kid's going to have a phone on them because of a school shooting. I want them to be safe. And I have a hard time not responding in a short comment to that because it is complicated to describe. But I've also been told, just like you have researched, that it does make them more unsafe. And so I thank you for digging into that. I'm going to pull that article and maybe do a little update on it because I think it's important for parents to really understand why it makes them unsafe, right? And
It was funny, actually. A Mama member shared at one of our meetings
mm-hmm,
when she joined Mama. She said she's not sure she agreed on that point. She thinks that smartphones have brought so many headaches to her life, but the only good thing about them was that she could stay in touch with her children at school in an emergency. And
mm-hmm,
then she was alerted that the school was having a safety drill. And her son didn't know that it was a practice and texted her that he was
uh-huh,
scared because this thing was happening. And he proceeded to text her throughout the entirety of the drill. And she was like, you need to get off and pay attention to your teachers. And he kept wanting to talk to her. And she realized there's absolutely nothing she could do to
right,
actually help him physically in that situation. And it
right,
had been her own anxiety
mm-hmm,
that had said to her, oh, you need to have constant contact, but it didn't
mm-hmm,
actually help at all.
right.
So she got up at a Mama meeting and said that her viewpoint had actually changed 180 degrees. And that was really interesting to hear from
Yeah,
someone.
that's a fabulous perspective. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, Julie. So, what final advice? What are some things that you really want to get across to parents? So, listeners here are parents when in regard to smartphones or screen time or social media.
Well, at the end of the day, social media companies' addictive algorithms and their hunger for profit are fueling an unprecedented youth mental health crisis and putting our kids at tremendous risk.
Hmm.
Through the Mama movement, parents are coming together to champion practices and policies that prioritize kids' safety and well being over big tech. We care about kids before technology.
Hmm.
We're taking on a multi-billion-dollar industry that's dumping obscene amounts of money into shutting down any effort to constrain it. But we're not going to stop fighting for our children. That's what makes our movement so powerful. So
Hmm.
we
Yeah.
invite all of your listeners to join us.
Thank you, Julie. And I think everyone should prioritize kids over the technology and the profits that that technology brings, including the executives at these technology companies. But they seem to have an imbalance or a misunderstanding of what is important. And so, thank you and your team for everything that you are doing to push us forward in the right direction here. And I'm happy and grateful to be able to share your message with listeners. And to listeners, thank you for always being open to these conversations. I really believe the more that we know and educate ourselves, the more we can prepare and protect our kids. So, Julie, thank you again for being here today.
Thank you for your time, Nikki. Appreciate it.
Of course.